We have a very special guest alert because on today's show, we are doing a crossover with the guys from Chargers Unleashed, getting into free agency, the Jim Harbaugh effect, the draft, and all of the craziness of this Chargers offseason.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. We've been covering the Chargers together for 8 seasons now, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys for making us your first listen, and to make sure you don't miss crazy crossovers like the one we have on today's show, make sure to go follow or subscribe on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. We have Dan Wolkenstein, we have Jake Hefner here to talk about all of the craziness of this Chargers offseason because it's been nuts. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Here they are, Chargers Unleashed. All right, guys, well, here is the very special crossover event. We have Chargers Unleashed, Locked On Chargers. We're here today with Dan W Sports, Dan Wolkenstein, and obviously Jake Hefner as well, the co-host of the Chargers Unleashed podcast. After a hectic offseason, a very eventful offseason so far, and we're going to get to everything, from just the general Jim Harbaugh effect that we're feeling so far, how we like free agency, what we think about the draft, Dan's hot take that somehow Malik Nabers is better than Marvin Harrison Jr. We'll have to get to that. But thank you guys for coming on. Excited to do this. It's been too long since we had something like this.
Absolutely. Quad box is always fun with you guys. Never gets old.
The 4x4, we got In and Out, or we have the Locked On Chargers, Chargers Elite crossover. This is so much fun. Thanks for having us, boys.
We couldn't do it, with half of the Chargers Unleashed crew. I mean, maybe we could sacrifice David if we needed to, but we had to get both of you guys on the show.
It's always me.
It is always him. It's always him. He's
Somebody's
right. No,
gotta
I'm
You know what, Daniel? It's going to be David and I on the next one. We're just going to sit
There we go.
perfect. All right, guys. Well, where do you begin? Crazy offseason. We're about 2 months into the Jim Harbaugh era right now, and so much has already happened, right? Whether it's, wholesale changes on the coaching staff, whether it's a total kind of roster upheaval that we've seen, not many guys brought back. Dan, how are you feeling about the Harbaugh effect? Are you feeling it? Do you feel Jim Harbaugh in your blood right now?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I don't think any Chargers fan could say otherwise after what we've seen the last 3 weeks, probably. Yeah. I mean, look at the free agency period. You look at some of the transactions they've made. No more Mike Williams. No more Keenan Allen. He gets shipped off to Chicago. Austin Eckler's gone. Gerald Everett's gone. K9's gone. There's so many things that have happened. And I think a lot of Chargers fans are kind of bracing for impact. And they look at the free agency and the guys that were signed. You can't help but feel the Jim Harbaugh effect. And I think that's what has, Chargers fans, or I hope Chargers fans, excited. Is that's what everyone's been yearning for. We're so desperate for someone who has a vision and a culture and an identity and is bold enough to go out and do it. So, I don't know how you can't be.
But Jake, also, though, sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? I mean, because there's been a couple moments in this offseason so far where it's careful what you wish for, right? You wanted different, but were you ready for different, right? Yeah. So I think that is part of it. It's hey, the excitement, you have Jim Harbaugh now, but it's oh no, things are different. This is uncomfy a little bit, right? We're not used to seeing some of the things that have happened so far.
Yeah, everybody went from having all that enthusiasm unknown to mankind to all of a sudden, what the hell is going on?
Exactly.
I feel like Joe Hortiz had a sign that said Tom Telesco around his neck for a few days after the Keenan Allen trade. So it was just, It was weird, man. But just in general, you understand how they are building this team. And when you really just look between the lines, and again, this is more of the Jim Harbaugh aura of everything. We haven't seen this coaching staff and this team take one snap of football yet.
Totally.
April 2nd.
And the intrigue and excitement and everything like that has flown through, and the team's not complete yet. But we have this idea of how this team is going to be constructed, how it's going to be balanced. We just have to see all these pieces come together. And when you see a player like 13 be involved in a trade and not be with this team anymore, there's a lot of emotions that you have to filter out at first to get through all of that. But when you understand the business side of why they did what they did, it makes sense. It sets the Chargers up in a great salary cap situation, not only for this year, but for next year as well. So in the long term, for where Jim Harbaugh is going to be coaching this team and for how long Justin Herbert's going to be the quarterback of this team, it makes sense to make those moves for the future. They're hard, but it makes sense.
Yeah, that was a tough bill, man. I'm not going to lie. When that move came through and they traded Keenan, that one took me some time for me to set the emotions aside. And
do you
really
feel like it's changing for you now, though? Like, do you feel like now that kind of the impact of it has fallen? Like, do you feel yourself kind of buying more in after, at the beginning of it, like, hey, I thought I was going to love every single move that's happened, and then they make a move that's pretty much universally hated. Like, David, have you calmed down at all about it?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've calmed down about it because now I understand that, like, obviously Keenan Allen is on the other side of 30. I still thought he had a couple of productive seasons in there, but they couldn't make the money work, right? They couldn't make the money work, and so they got some decent compensation for it. Obviously, we'll see what that 4th round pick turns into, but that is the business side of the NFL. These moves happen all the time. Very rarely do we see players be able to have the privilege of staying with one franchise for their entire career. It just doesn't happen, unfortunately, anymore. But hey, Dan here, Pro Football Network came out with a list of the top 10 NFL head coaches in 2024, and Jim Harbaugh was on that list at number 6 already. Are you surprised at all that he just came right back into the league, was vaulted right into the top echelon of coaches in the league?
His reputation precedes him, and there's a reason for that. He's won everywhere. We've all talked about it, we've all heard about it, but he just came off winning the Natty. And before that, he was winning everywhere else. And the last time he was in the NFL, he was in Super Bowl. Like, there's a reason for that. And that's why everyone has been pounding the over on all the bets of what games are going to win this year. No, I'm not surprised. 6, like, maybe, but on the list? No. Like, that's why Chargers fans were all in, literally all in on Jim Harbaugh, was because he was the big fish that Chargers fans, and honestly, half the franchise in the past 5 years have been after. So no, not surprised at all.
I mean,
well, Jake, he comes into the league with one of the highest winning percentages in NFL history as a head coach. So can we really be that surprised that, everybody has that kind of high esteem for Jim Harbaugh?
No, I don't think that we could be surprised at it at all. I mean, again, as Dan was saying, it's just like this guy has won everywhere that it's been. I think it's from the standpoint that it's this fan base that is getting that coach. I mean, they're backing the Brinks truck up for him. They make it a point to get the guys that he wants on his staff, Ben Herbert, Jesse Minter, a lot of other assistant coaches to build out his team. Historically, this franchise does not do that. This ownership does not do that. Yeah. So to see that transition happen, it was more than just getting a head coach. It felt like we were in a different universe for a good period of time. Just like, this doesn't happen, and it feels great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think, part of it, to your point, is just how we've seen the ownership kind of get out of the way, right? I mean, Jake, think about it this way. Like, does a Keenan Allen trade like that happen if the ownership is still meddling, right? Do they let that guy get away? Can they separate it if they don't have this new regime who they promised, right, that they would let kind of make these big calls? Like, it doesn't feel like Keenan Allen gets traded, not just for like what the compensation was, Jake, but like also just, I don't know if the ownership would have stepped in the past if it wasn't such a new regime that is taking over and saying, hey, you have to get out of the way and let us make the football moves we need to make, even if it's going to hurt. Because to me, it feels like all the, the Joey Bosa contract, the Derwin James contract, the Keenan Allen contract, Mike Williams, like it feels like there's a little emotion in it. Whereas this guy, new regime's coming in and it feels like there's no emotion to it, which is kind of why it was so shocking.
Yeah, I think we always have to remember that it was the old regime that set us up in the position that we were in.
Yeah,
now
totally.
Having to deal with those big.
Curse you, Tom Telesco.
But to your point, Dan, no, I don't believe that Tom Telesco would have made that move, even if it would have been necessary in the long run for what you want to set this team up for, even if it meant opening up $23 million in cap space that you could use elsewhere. No, I don't believe that they would have done that.
Well, and to put a bow on that list, like the reason I think they have him on the list is it's not just him as a coach. Like it's him as the identity. It's him as kind of the steering of the ship. Like it's not When's the last time the Chargers had 30 plus on their coaching staff? Like,
yeah,
go back a
the
year
sheer
ago.
size of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The sheer
Like
size.
they have so
the girth.
much. They have
It's
a
lot
mind
there.
trust here that is like massive, that you are expecting to pay dividends when it comes time to play football. And the names that they've brought in, Jake and I were talking about it when all the hires were made. Jesse Minter, other than Jim Harbaugh, that was the name. That was the guy.
Yeah.
If they got him, I could care less of the rest.
Yeah.
That's why he's 6, let alone the fact that he's an incredible head coach. It's
Right.
the aura and the vision that has transformed this team. And yeah, I don't think
I got goosies.
And other
going.
coaches, like, even if it's not Jim Harbaugh, like, what other coaches come in that would have the gravitas to be able to say, yeah, we're getting rid of Keenan Allen. Yeah, he's the heart and soul of this team for the last decade
just
plus.
follow me. I got this.
Yeah,
Follow
like,
me.
What coach is doing that other than Jim Harbaugh?
We have so much more to get into with the Chargers Unleashed, guys, getting into the draft, getting into free agency, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I do need to tell you guys about FanDuel, and I don't need to remind you, I don't think that this is the best time of the season to be betting on sports because you have the biggest college basketball tournament in the world going on right now, and the craziness is still going, and you have huge upsets, Cinderella stories, all of those things, and you have so many different games to bet on, and you can say goodbye to the busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now is the best time to do it as well because new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And if you're just missing football, you can already pick who's going to win it all for football. You can go bet the Chargers to win this Super Bowl if you want to. Everything that you're looking for is on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and you can bet on college hoops until they cut down the net. Yeah, and it's also the reports you hear, too, where it's like the locker room, even though we saw a lot of reactions, right, that the locker room still bought in, right? Like that the Keenan Allen trade didn't really shift their mentality as far as like, okay, well, these guys don't know what they're doing, right? And I think that's just the credit, the credibility, the pedigree that he comes into the building with. And I think with the Minter thing, it's so huge because the difference is for me and why I have more faith in the Jesse Minter defense as opposed to Brandon Staley, he brought everyone with him, right? How many coaches from Brandon Staley's Rams defensive staff did he bring with him to Los Angeles? It rhymes with hero. There was none, right? It was a bunch of dudes from college, right? And he thought he was doing a kind of a smart thing of going and getting these young minds who had been around a lot of these players and all of those things. But he didn't bring anyone to help him install. He brought in some Vic Fangio guys, right? We saw him with guys he had some relationships with, but it was pretty bare bones. Like Derek Ainsley and Brandon Staley hadn't been together, right? So the Ronaldo Hill, Vic Fangio guys. So I think that's huge. That's like not just Jesse Minter. We brought the entire Michigan defensive coaching staff to get this new thing installed in year one. And I think there's a lot of reason to be excited about that. But let's go to free agency because free agency, I think, has been another shift in the paradigm as opposed to how they do things, Jake. And I think the biggest thing to me is the Chargers haven't signed big names, right? Tom Telesco was known for signing big names. You're not going to find one marquee free agent in this free agency class so far, right? A lot of littler names, a lot of singles, right? We don't need home runs and strikeouts. It feels like there's a lot, which is good, right? But what have you made of the approach so far to seemingly kind of bypass, the big names, the Saquon Barkleys of the world, for example, right? To take kind of a smarter approach to find cheaper dudes, hoping they can bounce back.
I mean, initially, they did that because they kind of had to do it.
Sure.
They were handcuffed
that's
financially.
Fair.
But when you look at this, and what this tells me is a few different things, because when you look at the Gus Edwards familiarity with Greg Roman and him coming in, when you look at some of the other moves that they made in terms of Bradley Bozeman or Will Dissly, he's getting guys that he knows what he has told us since his introductory press conference, what he's going to do. So here's your little nuggets to follow the breadcrumbs of where we're going in this circumstance.
I'm going to sign at least 3 redheads in this free agency. Mark my words.
Yes.
3 ginger
We're out here stealing souls.
Yes, that was the thing that we missed. It was the redheads. Yes, but it's him installing his system. It's him knowing what Greg Roman needs as the offensive coordinator. They together now are going to, this is their second stint that they're going to be coaching together. That you saw what they did in San Francisco as it relates to the run game. They know the system that they want to run. And I think just from that standpoint, and I think that this is what another point that gets me excited about come draft time is Harbaugh is going to go to all of his guys, whether it's Roman, Minter, whoever it may be. And he's going to go to them and say, who do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Who is it that you want? And I'm going to go out and get him. It's not going to be a decision-making process that was made in the past regime. This is going to be much more of a collaborative grouping decision, whether it relates to free agency or the draft. And yes, are they not the biggest moves? No, they're not. But in my opinion, we've been down the big free agent moves before. And the biggest intangible that really, I think, kept those things from blossoming was the coaching. Good coaching can overcome injuries, can elevate player statuses from what you might think are just low-level free agent signings into something great. Good coaching is what makes the difference in that.
Well, also, I think some of these decisions here, Dan, it's part of building the identity of what this Chargers team is going to be, right? Is bringing in the type of players that are going to be able to implement that physicality, that toughness, that attitude of, you don't want to play the Chargers. These are the type of players that we need to be able to make that vision come to life.
You're 100% right. And you look at some of the signings that they've made, even just re-signings, what they did to bring back Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and the commitment they got from those two to stay.
Pay cuts.
You look at some of the, which, like, who takes pay cuts these days?
When is the last
I thought there was no way Joey Bosa would take a pay cut. I
can't remember the last time we saw a true pay cut, not a restructure, not moving things around and shuffling. Like, you're taking $7 million less this year, Joey. Right? How do you feel about it?
And you have to give him credit for that. And you have to.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of Chargers fans that ate crow for what they were saying about Joey Bosa, and that's okay, because what was shown in the past got you to feel that way. But you look at what this team has brought in. You look at Hayden Hurst. You look at the other tight end. They got Will Dissly, who was a mountain of a tight end for blocking purposes. Puna Ford comes in to help with the interior defensive line. Troy Dye for special teams. Denzel Perryman is a heat-seeking missile. Chargers fans know him very well.
Right.
Bradley Bozeman, versatile offensive lineman. Like, these are huge. Gus Edwards, like, these are the types of players that this Chargers team has not had. Jake, you and I have talked about this, and I'm sure Dan and David, you have too. It's the underbelly of this roster that has constantly failed.
Yes.
And you can blame the players, you can blame the coach, you can blame the training staff, you can blame the GM, whatever. It hasn't worked out. And because of all those huge contracts, they haven't had the resources to get these guys. And if you can get 10 to 15 B quality signings, I'll take that over 2 to 3 top tier signings a la JC Jackson every day of the week. Because that's what builds championships, not the star players. You need the underbelly to succeed.
Yeah, winning the offseason doesn't, how many teams that win the offseason do super well, right?
Chargers fans know that very well.
In any sport.
And I think the other thing, Jake, too, is when you're looking at the moves, it feels very intentional. It feels very targeted. It feels like it gives you some flexibility in the draft. Check, check, check. There's still space, right? There still are entertaining in-season trades and post-draft moves and things like that. But to me, one of the things is when you saw those pay cuts with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, the one thing I said, oh my God, they're not just shuffling money around, right? They're not jeopardizing the future. There is a macro view of this. There's a big picture view of this.
Yeah.
And find me, the contract they've given out so far that's going to extremely hinder them, even if they totally flame out, right? Exactly. Like, even if it's the biggest thing in the world, you're not taking $40 million next year for a JC Jackson that's not on the team, right? So it's been about the targeted moves, but as much as that, to me, it's, hey, we're not going to just push the can down the road or kick the can down the road, right? We're not going to just move money around and put ourselves in this position next year. Everything we've done has been smart in the sense of, hey, even if it doesn't work out, we have so much space next year and we haven't jeopardized that.
Yeah, this is another thing you have to give to Ed McGuire as far as his credit, and he's done massive contract reworks over the last several years as it relates to the Chargers, but finding this avenue with this new front office to do, because I'm sure everybody knew, like, okay, we're in cap hell, when the offseason gets started. Like, how do we?
It was ages
I mean,
ago.
you look at the Saints, and they're in cap hell every year, and that doesn't mean anything. So,
right. So, like, how do you dig yourself out of this? And thankfully to them, they tried it one way a year ago. Thankfully, they figured out a way to do that this time around in a much different way while keeping 2 out of your big 4.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not going to hinder them in the future, because at best, they're going to play this year. Hopefully, the trio of Thule, Mack, and Bosa all get a chance to play significant snaps together in this defense. and most likely you move off of them. And then, what does Joe Hortiz always say that he likes? How we as a Chargers franchise who have never experienced comp picks,
say it.
We are so excited about 6th and 7th round comp picks right now.
So they got like 4 of them right now.
Yes, we have 4 of them right now. Plus, I think there's going to be another 7th round pick in there for the J.C. Jackson trade next year. So it's just the little things that you have to do to make Charger fans happy today.
Well, hey, we talked about all of the free agents. I mean, Dan, you pretty much went through all of them when you were giving your answer. So that leads me to this question, and this is for everybody here. What is or who has been your favorite free agency signing so far?
All right, I'll go first. I'm going to say Bradley Bozeman. And it's so weird because it's like, if when you look at the stats and things like that, like you're not going to be blown away, take away the fact that Bryce Young was the worst quarterback in the NFL at avoiding sacks last year. And that's a little bit important in that conversation, right? But just somebody that durable, somebody that knows the system, and somebody that comes in with a calling card, right? Because you can look at his, pass protection numbers and all those things. The dude's coming in to help you improve your running game, and there's no more important part of the offensive line in the running game than the center. The center is what turns good runs into great runs. It turns bad runs into good runs. Like, that's what it is, the connectivity of whoever you have in the middle. So to get that physical presence in there, Dan, for me, and to give yourself some flexibility where you don't feel like you're pigeonholed to have to, trade back into the first round to get a Jackson Powers Johnson. Like, I love that move way more than I think the stats would kind of suggest.
100%. And you look at like the flexibility and the durability. You talked about it, and the familiarity with Greg Roman and the style of offense looking to run. I'm with you. I was probably going to go that route.
Sorry about it. Should answer first.
I know I should have. I'm gonna go a different route. I'm gonna go Will Dissly. And this one,
that's a good one.
And this one, I thought about Gus Edwards, but that's low hanging fruit. I'm gonna go Dissly because we've seen how terrible the offensive line or the running game in general, and that offensive line extends to pass protection for running backs and tight ends, as well as run blocking for tight ends.
100%.
And the run blocking for this Chargers team, for the tight end group specifically, has been horrendous. Like,
god awful.
Like, you can't get much worse than what the Chargers have had.
No.
And they bring in Will Dissly, who I believe is the second or third best run blocker of all last year. And he's top 2 and 3 in both run and pass protection.
Yeah.
The run game for this team and pass protection has been just as much because of the offensive line as it has been the other guys, the running backs and the tight ends who are blocking.
Agree.
And you take what it has been a weakness and turn it into a strength with one player. That's what got me jazzed. I saw that. I was like, oh, okay, finally somebody listened and somebody understood the assignment. So, I think Will Dissly is going to make a massive impact when it comes to winning football games. He's not going to be the sexy guy on the sidelines. Not going to be the guy who's getting all these. When it comes to winning football, he's going to be a reason why.
Jake, I feel like he stole yours.
He did steal mine.
Yeah,
Bradley, you both stole mine. Bozeman was my number one, so I was saying to myself, I'm going to go with Dissly. So instead of saying my favorite pick, I'm going to say I'll talk about the most intriguing free agent signing. That'll be Christian Fulton.
Oh, you're right. Yeah,
Christian Fulton. Mm-hmm. When you started looking at what was left over from the cornerbacks in free agency, most of them were just under 30 years old. You needed some more youth in this locker room, and that, especially in that cornerback position. Obviously, you needed a lot of help. Jasir Taylor and Dean Leonard are still question marks at this point. Mike Davis is now over at the Washington Commanders. So who did you need? You knew you were still going to be drafting a quarterback. Them selecting Christian Fulton does not deter them in selecting a corner in this draft early at all. But the idea of a young 25-year-old reclamation project in Jesse Minter's defense, former second-round pick for the Titans, has just battled unfortunate injury luck over the last 2 years. Luckily for him, nothing very significant. And from everything that Dan and I have heard from the Tennessee side of things is that he just needed a change of scenery. So I like the idea of a one-year deal, prove-it type deal. Again, in this defense, when he is normally a press man corner, which the Chargers have definitely need that type of help for. I like the intrigue on what that could ultimately turn out to be if he stays healthy and really thrives in this defense.
Yeah, I think the intrigue is a great point there because it is intriguing. You don't know what's going to happen. And like me and David talked about, right? super impressive also that he chose the Chargers to be the team to rehab him and get him that next contract, because that's what it's all about for him at this point, right? The Chargers wanted to deny him, but he had a big part of that conversation too. He didn't come for the money. I mean, we know that, but he came for, you're going to make me more money, right? Jim Harbaugh, noted player developer, noted coach developer, and what he's done in both of those aspects has been great. And I think the coaching part is honestly even more. The man develops coaches. He has an eye for great coaches. He's built a hell of a staff so far. Let's switch gears to the draft, because I just want to know how often Dan Wolkenstein drinks and Twitters at the same time, because, you see some things. You see some things on there from, future girl dad to, another hashtag girl dad. I know it ruffled some feathers, and I joke here because I'm really high on both these guys. But you definitely made some waves, and anyone that says anything polarizing about either of these guys is going to get hated on by some aspect, right? But you had Malik Nabers over Marvin Harrison Jr. Why do you think that Nabers is a better fit for the Chargers than Marvin Harrison?
Please tell us.
Okay, so funny you mentioned this. We just did an episode on the fit of these two players. And while the conversation of who is the better player, in my mind, that's for a different conversation. I think they're just different. They're equally lethal.
So different.
And my stance on the two players was kind of hedged on the presence of Keenan Allen. And so much of this discussion, I was on Malik Nabers' hype train since December. And I have thought he was my favorite prospect for this Chargers team since then. And in December, it was never a thought that Keenan Allen would not be on this team.
Totally.
And having a Malik Nabers be that cherry on top for a wide receiver room that drastically needs explosiveness, that already has a receiver that is your possession, your get open guy whenever you want a third down, that could just go off and go crazy. Yeah, that's the guy. But with Keenan Allen not there and Mike Williams not there, that changes things.
Yeah.
And we go through like what this wide receiver room now lacks, right? It lacks yards after the catch. It lacks explosiveness. It lacks contested catch machine now. It lacks your third down, like Hoover vacuum cleaner. It lacks speed, other than if you want to say Quentin Johnson, who's unproven, or Darius Davis, who is your wide receiver 5.
Right.
There's so many things that this receiver room lacks.
They need everything. Yeah.
So which receiver brings you the most of those things? That's Marvin Harrison Jr. And so my stance may have shifted to now Marvin Harrison Jr. being the best fit for this team.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that Malik Nabers isn't going to go absolutely crazy for another team, and he will. Or maybe
I'm gonna be sad either way. If they pick one of the two, I'm gonna be like, it's gonna make me sad to not have Malik Nabers, even if they go Marvin Harrison Jr. So that's why I wanted to bring that up, because it's all in jest. They're so good. They're so close.
Yeah.
You're not missing on either one. The thing that nobody wants is just for you to get neither of them, right, David? Like that's what we're most scared of. Both guys are available. Joe Alt is the pick. Like that is the worst case scenario. Obviously, assuming that you're not trading down.
David, okay, you guys
don't even make those noises.
I was going to ask you guys. So we've talked about this a little bit.
Shoot from the hip.
So much discussion has been about Malik Nabers or about Marvin Harrison Jr. Or you hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, they're going to trade down. They're going to go offensive tackle, all of that stuff.
Sure.
But you don't hear many people who have put their stamp on approval of this Chargers team will draft a tackle at 5.
Ugh.
Because if you think about
it's not going to be me.
Like BPA, there's no way that is a tackle.
It's exactly what I said yesterday.
So if that happens,
we said,
if that happens, Joe Hortiz took a backseat to Jim Harbaugh because there's no other way. So, like, do you foresee there actually being a chance that they go tackle at 5? Just at 5. If everything else stays, they stay at 5.
Yeah.
I can't see it. Yeah, I can't see it. And the reason why for me is I don't feel like the value fits the pick. And also, there's a glaring, gigantic hole in the wide receiver room. I mean, you just talked about it. The lack of explosiveness, the lack of playmaking ability, the reliability, the high-end just talent at that position is not there at the moment. And I think you would be just an absolute fool if you were to pass over the opportunity to grab an immediate impact player at the position that they are designed to play over a tackle that you might have to move to guard or switch to the other side. And there's just no guarantee that that's going to translate to the NFL level. So if that were to happen, I would be obscenely upset. I think that there's just no way that I would want that reality for the Chargers.
Daniel, could you talk yourself into it? Could you talk yourself into it?
Hell no. The thing is like,
Hell
Joe
no.
Hortiz isn't going to sit there and lie to me and tell me, like, everyone says best player available, and then everyone immediately reaches for needs. It happens every single year. It's just like people saying, the combine is not going to change how I feel about this prospect, and then Audric Estime runs at 4.7, and everyone's like, are we sure? Are we sure? To an extent, right? It's like everyone says these things. Everyone says you're going to take best player available. There's not a tackle in this class that would take over any of the top 3 receivers for the Chargers. Not one, right? There's
or
not a
Brock
tackle
Bowers.
I would take at 5 over Brock Bowers. There isn't. I would rather have the blue chip offensive weapon in an offense that's drastically missing firepower right now.
Yeah.
Like, I think you could even make the argument for Malik Nabers saying, hey, this can be a play action offense, right? If you have a play action offense, you want a dude who's going to stop and then go, and nobody's going to be able to catch him because they're afraid of your running game. And then once you realize it's not a run, it's too late if you're talking about Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr., because they're both excellent. But a tackle at 5, you're not going to be able to convince me it's the best player available. You're not going to be able to convince me it's the biggest need. So who are you appeasing? It feels like you would be going way out of your way to try to prove a point that things are going to be different under you, and you don't need to. Everyone's bought in already.
Yeah.
You don't need to prove that to people, right? I can't see it happening. It would make me extremely upset. But I think, to me, Jake, what's been getting more difficult for me is the thought of trading back. Because in a vacuum, trade back. This roster has more holes and needs more talent in such a big way. You have to trade back. And then you start falling in love with these receivers. You fall in love with Malik Nabers. You fall in love with Marvin Harrison Jr. And all of a sudden, for me, it's like, I don't know if anyone's going to be able to fit like what I'm going to need back to feel good about passing up on one of those guys. Because, like, to me, the price gets steeper and steeper. The more it just makes so much sense to take, knowing you're going to have a chance at one of these top 2 receivers, Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison. And it's just like, how steep does it have to be, Jake, before you feel good about passing up on one of those guys?
It's getting to be too steep, honestly.
And this is Jake saying this.
Because it doesn't make sense, Dan. They should trade back, and I don't want them to.
Yes. This is like just trying to read Chinese algebra and trying to figure it out without having any type of education, because really...
my water out. What does Chinese algebra look like? I'm going to have to look it up after this.
I don't even know.
I don't even like regular algebra, so...
Right.
What are Mandarin numbers? I don't know.
Exactly. But for me, being the biggest trade down advocate over the past 10 years for this team, and now you tell me, okay, Jim Harbaugh is the head coach. We now have a GM who is used to making those type of trades.
Yeah.
And now you're going to tell me that the Chargers are going to be in a position to arguably take the best player in this draft. No, you don't do it. And this sucks for me to say this. The football gods are a fickle bunch. They really are, because this is the year that all those things that you just said, Dan, make perfect sense for them to do. There are so many holes.
2 first-round picks, right?
It's so intriguing. I get it. And look,
I'm straight up not doing it for 11 and 23. Let me throw it out there. I'm not doing it for 11.
Not enough.
Well, if it's Marvin Harrison Jr. or that, I agree.
Okay, so then this would be my ask of you, because maybe this could make you feel better. If you're not doing it for 11 and 23, to me, I don't think that there's any other team out there that has the ammunition that's going to move up for any player that's a non-quarterback. So in your mind, what would it take for you to move out of that 5 spot? And after that, that should make you feel better from the standpoint that they're probably not going to move out of it. And I'll explain why after you answer.
I think the hard thing is what you're getting back this year, right? Yeah. Because it's like, it gets so much harder for me to get out for the 2025 picks, right? It just is, because I want to, this team needs the help and they need it right now. So, and everything gets bumped back a grade, right? A first is a second and a third is a fourth, and so have you. Like, I want immediate impact this year, and then you're going to have to give me something great next year just for me to want to move back from that. So, like, if it's 11 and 23, like, they don't have a future second round pick next year. Like, if it's the Raiders or the Broncos, I want the 2025 first. I might want your 2025 second. I might need the 2025 first and the 2026 first if I'm trading it to a division rival like that. And if they want to do that to draft the fourth quarterback available, I'm going to do that. I'm going to laugh at them all the way until I get their top 5 pick next year, right?
Exactly.
But it's going to have to, it has to be a king's ransom. Like, to me, it has to be a king's ransom. It has to be the quarterback price. If the quarterbacks are gone and nobody's willing to do that, I'm staying 100%. If 4 quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, 4, there's almost no trade that makes sense that any other team would do that would make me want to trade back, because you're paying the premium for a quarterback. If you're not getting that premium pay, I'm staying and taking the premium player. End of story to me.
If the trade's not for 11 and 23, then 37 for the Chargers makes the most sense for them to actually execute a trade back.
Go
to
for
me.
it.
That's totally fine. Here's what I'll say about
trade back
Marvin
from every
Harrison.
other one of your picks. Trade from 105 to 107 and 110 to 121.
Just not 5, and as long as you're taking a receiver.
Don't trade out of 69 because it's like I need to see 700 Charger fans say nice as soon as the 69th overall pick is made. Besides that, if you don't trade back and you take Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers, trade back on every single one of your other picks. I'm fine with that.
Yes. The last thing I'll say about this as it relates to Marvin Harrison Jr., if he happens to make it to 5. Remember, I was talking about earlier just in terms of listening to what the coaches are saying, and we've obviously seen, Jesse Minter said in his first interview that he would love the opportunity to coach Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Thule. That was just before free agency hit, and he's gonna get the opportunity to do
idiot.
that.
There's no way you're getting all 3 of those players. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
If you recall what was it? Just
little did we know.
Snippets of an interview just weeks ago where it was Harbaugh and Minter just lauding over Marvin Harrison Jr. and what they had to do as a defense to cover that guy. Now, if it's me, I would rather have that guy than having to defend against him throughout the year. So look at how much respect is put on that from their perspective as it relates to Marvin Harrison Jr. I joked with somebody, said maybe the only reason that Jim Harbaugh is going to take Joe Alt is because maybe he'd think it would be sacrilege for his first pick as a Chargers head coach to take an Ohio State guy.
Sure.
But in reality, I don't see how you could pass off of Marvin Harrison Jr. if he's on the board at 5.
I think if it comes down to 4 quarterbacks going, they stay at 5, they go Marvin Harrison Jr. End of story. I think you can lock that in.
Yeah.
If it ends up going 3 quarterbacks and 1 receiver, then it gets a little hairy, because I'm not sure that they would say no to a haul versus Malik Nabers. While as dynamic and as explosive as he is not as surefire year 1.
Yeah.
Like, boom.
You need a wide receiver 1 this year.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Marvin Harrison Jr., you feel like steps on the scene. He's
good.
Wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and the crazy part is that would make all the Keenan Allen stuff feel like it never happened.
It's the closest thing you could do. I don't think it's possible to erase it. I think
memories, but like how viscerally upset everybody was at the Chargers front office doing it. 2 months later, you bring in Marvin Harrison Jr. You're like, okay.
Marvin Harrison Jr. scores that first touchdown. Everyone forgets that Keenan Allen was a Charger. No, I mean, of course, right? And the thing is, too, even what Dave was saying, hey, let's see who that 4th round pick is. Please let's not hold this 4th round pick they got back for Keenan Allen to be Keenan Allen, right?
Of course not.
Let's totally no, but it's not even you, David. People are doing that already. I can't wait to see who pick 110 is because that guy is in for it.
Let's compare him to Larry Roundtree and Trey McKinney. Okay, let's
exactly.
compare him to those guys.
No, exactly. But now, the thing is that they're gonna have such good options, and as much I like what Jake said about look back what Jesse Minter said about the Marvin Harrison Jr. when they played each other, right? When he didn't know he was going to have a chance to draft him, right? Because that's going to be a much more
honest
thoughtful, honest tune than you're going to get right now. When who in the world would want the Chargers to know that they like Marvin Harrison Jr. at all, right?
Yeah,
I want them to think that Jim Harbaugh wants the offensive lineman. I'm just kind of worried he's sick enough to actually do it, and that's what scares me. You know what I mean? So it's just Joe Hortiz, I have to feel even with the bust of the receivers of, the Ravens have had in the past and stuff like that, it's the man's been watching talent for so long. I think he knows, hey, there's not many receivers I've seen that look like Marvin Harrison Jr., and I've been doing this for 26 years or whatever, right? So, I have to think that, and especially with what Joe Hortiz has been able to do specifically with offensive linemen later on in the draft, and him specifically telling us there's good offensive linemen in every round of this draft. It's just hard. I've watched Joe Alt, right? I'm not as high as Joe Alt than I was of Rashawn Slater coming out. You know what I mean? So it's like, I maybe he is a generational tackle. When I look at Marvin Harrison Jr. and even Malik Nabers, I see something different where it's like, oh shoot, I've been doing this for like 5-6 years now. It's like, I don't know if I've seen all these things at once. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I've seen these combinations of polish or explosiveness and all of those things. So it's like, they're going to have such a great option. I have to, I hope they either get a king's ransom or they come away with one of the top 2 receivers. And like, that's just kind of it for me. Like, it has to kind of be one of those options for me to feel good about it. I'm still going to, I'm not going to quit the team. I'm not going to quit Locked On Chargers if the Chargers take Joe Alt. I'm going to be so mad about it though. And I'm going to cry about it for weeks
David,
at the very least.
So then the last one, door number 3. Say they do trade back and it's 11-23 and whatever else. What's your feeling at 11 if they go tackle?
After he puts a hole in the wall.
I'm much more amenable to it at 11 than I am at 5. I still would probably prefer a Brock Bowers at 11, especially with the money situation being there. But I would be a lot more agreeable to seeing at 11 than I would at 5, just because I feel like the value is a lot more on par than at 5.
And I honestly, I might even reach and just be like, who do I think is the best cornerback in this class, and even go that over offensive tackle, right?
Carry on Arnold.
Like, you potentially still need 2 starters there. Like, Christian Fulton gives you the safety net of, okay, at least we know that, Dean Leonard, who's never played, isn't going to be pressed into action as a 7th round pick from Canada, right? If we need him, right? Like, we have someone who has legitimate starting experience there if you need him. And hopefully he's pushing whoever there, and if he wins that spot, good for him, right? But, like, I think as far as this goes, like, with the draft at 11, yeah, I mean, it's still, probably a couple positions I'd rather take than offensive line. But yeah, if it's 11, if it's into the teens, if something like that happens and they take an offensive lineman, it's not going to make me nearly as sick, knowing at least you have more ammunition to take a more volume approach. Take 3 wide receivers, right? If you don't take 1 at 5, whatever it is, So you'd at least have that kind of draft capital. You have that kind of, something to feel good about, something to tuck you in at night. Because if you just take Joe Alt at 5 and get nothing for it, there's nothing tucking you in at night except for bad feelings. So I love this conversation. I'm glad we got to do this. Thank you to the Locked On Chargers. The Chargers Unleashed. I do Locked On Chargers. They do Chargers Unleashed. Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner. Make sure you guys go check their show out. They're super fun. And we've all known each other for forever now, and we'll all be hanging out as soon as training camp starts. Can't wait to see what you guys have planned. Also, I think I'm going to declare you getting the biggest Chargers guests, especially the players. I mean, you're not going to find the player interviews you see.
They kill it.
Dan Wolkenstein. Let's see if he can get inside, Jim Harbaugh and get Jim Harbaugh to give him some players. Then I'll be impressed. But hey, Dan, thank you so much. Jake, appreciate you guys' time. Thank you for coming on. It was so much fun.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you.
Of course, guys. This has been a blast.
A special thank you to the guys from Chargers Unleashed. We had so much fun. Make sure you guys are following Dan Wolkenstein at Dan W Sports on Twitter and finding Jake at Jake T Hefner on there. Make sure you guys are also coming back to us for great episodes like the one we put on today. You can follow us and find us for free wherever you get your podcast from, and you can also follow and subscribe for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel. You can also find the show every day on our social media. You can find us on Twitter at Locked On LAC. You can find me at Dan Talk Sports, David Drogemeyer at Dro Talk SD on there, and you can also find the show at Locked On Chargers on Instagram and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. But make sure you guys are back here because Monday is Mock Draft Monday and the draft is right around the corner. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.